Hi, my name's Naraya. Just hours before the biggest dance competition of my life, my sister went into my room, unzipped my garment bag, and cut my dress into pieces. And when I walked onto that stage anyway, wearing the backup dress she didn't know existed, she turned pale. But the truth is, that dress wasn't the only thing she tried to destroy. What kind of sister does something like that? And what kind of mother watches it happen and still says nothing? They smiled at me during breakfast, while hiding scissors behind their backs. Do you ever wonder what happens when the quiet one stops shrinking and finally steps into the light? When I pulled into the driveway, the sun was barely hanging on above the hills. The adobe walls of the house looked the same, but something in me knew the warmth inside wouldn't match the color of the clay. I sat in the car for a moment longer than I needed to, hands resting on the steering wheel. No one had come out, not even a glance through the window. I opened the trunk, lifted out my duffel, and the garment bag I'd carried like it was glass. The moment I stepped into the front door, the scent hit me first. Velma's usual lavender spray and overcooked chicken. Familiar, but not welcoming. She didn't look up from her phone when I walked into the kitchen. "Oh, you're here," she muttered. I stood there holding my bags while she scrolled. Delphine was already perched at the island counter, with a glass of wine in hand, dressed like she was waiting for a photo op. Her blouse crisp, hair curled, nails done in that soft gray she always said looked executive. "I thought you were arriving tomorrow," she said with a smirk, not even making eye contact. "I told you I was driving in tonight after rehearsal," I replied. My voice came out even, but tight. Velma's eyes finally flicked up from her screen. "Did you stop for dinner, or should I fix you something? There's still some of Delphine's lemon chicken in the fridge." "I'm good, thanks." I took a seat at the end of the table. Not the one where I used to sit. That one was now stacked with Velma's mail and some real estate brochures. There wasn't a single place set for me. Delphine swirled her glass. "Big day tomorrow, huh? Dancing in front of all those judges. Nerve-wracking." "It's not the first time," I said, and unzipped my bag quietly. "You never told me what the competition was for," Velma cut in, stirring sugar into her tea. "Is it just a local event?" "It's statewide," I answered. "Top school reps from across New Mexico. Winner gets a shot at the fellowship in Seattle." She blinked. "Oh, I thought Delphine said it was some recital." Delphine smiled. "Mom probably misunderstood. I didn't want to get anyone's hopes up." That hit harder than anything else could have. I let it slide. You learn after a while that arguing with people who already made up their minds is like shouting into wind. Velma stood up, walked over to the fridge, and opened it as if I'd said nothing at all. "Anyway, we've had a busy day here. Delphine just got promoted. She's now managing 3 entire regions. Isn't that something?" I turned my head slightly, enough to catch Delphine's little head tilt, the kind she gives when she knows she's won. "Congratulations," I said. It tasted like rust in my mouth. "You didn't tell us much about your little dance thing," Velma added, pouring herself another cup. "Is there even an audience?" "Yes," I said. "A panel and a full auditorium." Delphine chuckled. "Guess we'll see if all that pirouetting paid off." I stood up. "I think I'll go unpack." Velma didn't protest. Delphine just tapped her nails on the rim of her glass and went back to reading something on her phone. I walked the same hallway I used to run through as a kid. The house hadn't changed much. The photos on the wall remained exactly where they were, except now, in the newer frames, I wasn't in most of them. Delphine in graduation robes. Delphine at company galas. Delphine with Velma at wine tastings in Santa Fe. My room was cleaner than I remembered, sterile, almost, like no one really expected me to come back. The comforter was neatly folded, and the air smelled like dust and lavender linen spray. A single framed photo sat on the dresser, me, Delphine, and Dad. But I remembered something about that photo that most people wouldn't notice. Velma had once cropped me out when she posted it on Facebook, said the focus was bad on the left side. I sat down on the edge of the bed, placed the garment bag carefully across the mattress, and let my shoulders drop for the first time since I'd gotten in the car that morning. From the kitchen, I could still hear the faint sound of Delphine's laugh. It used to be a lovely sound. Now it cut like a slow blade. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling fan that spun lazily, never fast enough to do anything but make noise. There was a time I used to think coming home meant being seen. That maybe, if I worked hard enough, they'd eventually notice. That if I stitched enough dresses, hit enough perfect turns, earned enough trophies, they'd say, "You matter, you did that." But the silence always answers louder. No one asked about the dress I designed. No one cared that tomorrow was the biggest performance of my life. No one even noticed the callus on my right heel had cracked open from rehearsal. I looked toward the closet. The bag was still there, sealed, quiet, patient. I hadn't told anyone about the second dress, the one they couldn't touch. Not even Delphine. I stood up and walked toward it. I flicked on the bedside lamp, letting the soft light wash across the room. The closet door creaked a little as I opened it. I moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but because what was inside didn't deserve to be rushed. Tucked behind a box of old shoes and a winter coat I hadn't worn in years, the garment bag waited. I pulled it free, careful not to snag the delicate zipper. It felt heavier than I remembered. Maybe it was the beads, or maybe it was everything I'd sewn into it that didn't come from a spool. Before I could unzip it, there was a knock. 3 polite taps. I froze. Delphine didn't wait for permission. She pushed the door open like it was her house, and I was just someone borrowing space. "You still awake?" she asked, stepping inside. I forced a smile and nodded once. "Couldn't sleep yet." Her eyes drifted toward the garment bag in my hand, but she said nothing about it. Instead, she made herself comfortable, sitting at the edge of the bed like we used to when we were teenagers, gossiping about boys we'd never kiss and teachers we couldn't stand. But this wasn't that. This was a chess move. "Nervous?" she asked, picking up my perfume bottle from the nightstand and turning it over in her hand. "Big crowd tomorrow, right?" I tilted my head slightly. "You know there is." She nodded, uncapping the bottle and sniffing it like it belonged to her. "You're brave, I'll give you that. Getting on stage in a homemade dress? Not sure I could ever." Her tone dripped with syrup, but I'd lived under that drizzle long enough to taste the poison underneath. "I guess it takes someone who doesn't scare easy," I replied, meeting her eyes. She smiled wide, too wide. "That's one way to spin it." There was a pause, the kind that stretches just enough to let meaning settle between the walls. "You didn't bring your dress out earlier," she added, setting the perfume down with a soft thud. "Hope it still fits. Would be a shame if it didn't." I didn't flinch. "It fits fine." She stood and adjusted her blouse in the mirror. "Good. I mean, it's not about winning, right? It's about showing up." Another pause. "I should let you rest," she added. "Wouldn't want you to mess up your big shot." She walked to the door, but turned before leaving. "Sleep tight." When the door closed behind her, I didn't move for a minute. I let the silence press in from all sides. Then I unzipped the garment bag. The backup dress was everything the first one wasn't. Midnight blue, floor length, sleeveless, with a sharp neckline that held its own. Every crystal had been hand-sewn, by me, over months of lunch breaks and after midnight moments. I hadn't told anyone, not even Lorelei. People thought strength looked loud. But I'd learned that real strength looked like preparation. Looked like knowing someone might hurt you, and choosing to be ready anyway. I held the dress up to my body, then walked toward the mirror. The light caught the crystals along the side panels and made them shimmer like stars. A breath caught in my chest, but it wasn't fear, it was confirmation. Inside the lining, near the hem, I'd stitched a quote from Dad. His handwriting, from an old card he gave me the year before he passed. "Don't shine to be seen. Shine so others see what's possible." I touched the words with the tip of my finger and nodded once. In the hallway, the floor creaked faintly. I knew that sound. Someone walking slowly, pausing every few steps. I didn't go to the door. I didn't call out. Let her walk. Let her listen. I hung the dress back up and turned off the light. Later, lying in bed with my eyes open in the dark, I stared at the ceiling fan again. It turned lazily, like it always had. But this time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. I'd already made my move. Tomorrow wasn't about convincing anyone. It wasn't about proving anything to Delphine or to Velma. It was about walking onto that stage in a dress no one could ruin, in a version of myself no one had prepared for. And when I stepped into that light, I'd finally see what it looked like to take up space without asking for permission. The early light filtered through the blinds, casting pale stripes across the floor. I lay still for a few more seconds, listening. No footsteps, no doors. The usual creak of Velma's coffee routine was missing, and the air had that heavy quiet only found in a house where something had already gone wrong. I sat up, reached for the water on my nightstand, and took a long sip. My throat was dry like I hadn't spoken in days, though I'd barely said a word last night. I glanced toward the closet, where the backup dress still hung, zipped, untouched. But that wasn't the one I reached for. Habit took me toward the garment bag I'd brought from Albuquerque, the one I'd worked on with every ounce of care I had. Ivory satin, lace accents, pearl-threaded sleeves. I knew every stitch like I knew the lines on my palms. I wanted one last look at it before I walked into the fire. I unzipped the bag, and for a few seconds, my brain didn't register what I was seeing. Like it refused. The sleeves were in pieces, clean slashes through the bodice, beads scattered across the bottom like broken teeth. My hands shook, fingertips grazing the ruined fabric. It hadn't snagged. This wasn't an accident. This was someone's decision. I backed away slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. Breathe, Naraya. Don't break now. The weight of the moment wrapped around my chest like something physical. I looked down at the dress again, now a heap of betrayal and cruelty. Whoever had done it hadn't just cut fabric. They'd taken time. They'd planned. And they made sure it was destroyed in a way that couldn't be fixed. I didn't need to ask who. I didn't even need proof. Delphine had always preferred precision over chaos. If she was going to hit me, she'd make sure it landed where it would hurt the most. Quiet, targeted, and irreversible. The last time I felt this way, I was 16. It was the morning of my conservatory audition, one that could have changed my entire path. Velma was supposed to drive me, but an hour before we left, Delphine came down with a mysterious fever. Pale, flushed, groaning like her insides were falling apart. Velma panicked. I can't leave her like this, baby. She needs me right now. We'll reschedule your thing. I tried to speak, to argue, but I was already losing. We'll explain it, she said. They'll understand. They didn't. No reschedule, no callback. Delphine was fine by dinner, ate an entire bowl of chicken soup and asked for seconds. I knew what that had been, but when I told Velma, just hinted that maybe Delphine hadn't been that sick, I got the lecture. She's your sister, she snapped. Why would you accuse her of something so ugly? That night I cried into my pillow, not because I lost an audition, but because I realized something more dangerous. I was alone in a house where someone could lie and win, and no one would ever believe me. And now, 10 years later, the same script played out. Only this time, I wasn't the same girl. I stood up and closed the garment bag. My hands were steadier now, my breath slower. I turned to the other side of the closet and pulled out the second bag, the one Delphine didn't know existed. It felt like silk and armor all at once. I unzipped it slowly. Midnight blue, deep and bold, the hem kissed with crystal detail. It was everything I wasn't allowed to be in this house. Loud, visible, undeniable. I laid it out across the bed. Light from the window caught on the stones and sent tiny sparks across the room. It didn't look like a plan. It looked like a declaration. I remembered sitting on my apartment floor months ago, cutting the first panel, telling myself I was being paranoid, that no one would dare sabotage me again. But something in me had known. Something had whispered, "Be ready." I wasn't crying. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because hurt didn't matter right now. What mattered was that I'd prepared for her cruelty. What mattered was that she had to try this hard to stop me, and still, I would go on. I stepped back, looked at the backup dress in full, and whispered to the air, to the past, to myself. Not this time. I folded it carefully and placed it back into its bag, zipped it slowly. I didn't slam drawers or stomp down the hall. I didn't need to. I had already won more than she knew. By the time I came downstairs, the air smelled like burnt syrup and overcompensating. Velma was in the kitchen, wearing her company robe, the one with the satin trim and initials embroidered near the collar, flipping pancakes with all the enthusiasm of someone hosting a brunch for people she hoped would forget the things she'd said behind their backs. Delphine was already seated, sipping coffee from the mug I used to consider mine. She smiled when she saw me, that sugar-coated look she reserved for when strangers were watching. Except no one was. "Morning," she said. "Sleep okay?" I nodded, pulling out a chair at the far end of the table. The tension in the room didn't hum. It draped. I could feel it in the way Velma's back stiffened when she turned to glance at me, spatula in hand. "Hope you're hungry," Velma said. "Delphine helped with the batter." "I stirred twice," Delphine added with a chuckle. Velma placed a plate in front of me. 2 uneven pancakes, one already hardening at the edge. It wasn't about food, it never was. Delphine set her cup down gently. "Rough morning?" I met her eyes, and held the gaze long enough to watch the corners of her smile twitch. "Not really," I said. "Just focused." She tilted her head, faux concern painted on. "Don't let little things ruin your day." Little things, like the dress she'd butchered, like the hours I'd lost remaking what should have been celebrated. Velma sat down across from me. "We'll be there tonight, of course. Wouldn't miss it." Of course. Now that it was too late for their absence to sting, they'd be visible. "Great," I said. "Thanks." Delphine reached for the butter. "It's impressive, really. I mean, going out there after everything. I don't think I'd have the guts." I picked up my fork slowly. Not everyone folds when things fall apart. The room fell into a soft hush. Velma stirred her coffee like she needed the noise. "Did you bring the dress down yet?" she asked, eyes on the cup. "No," I said. "I've got it covered." Delphine smirked. "Hope it still fits. Things can change overnight." I stood, quietly, intentionally. "I'm going to take a breath outside." I didn't wait for a response. The air on the porch was cooler than I expected. Dry, honest. A few birds flitted between the trees across the yard. I heard the door creak behind me. Delphine stepped out, closing it behind her like we were about to share a secret. She joined me at the railing, leaning on her forearms. "You're not mad, are you?" I looked at her, really looked. "No," I said. "Good, because it would be a shame if today became about drama." She laughed lightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't respond. She kept going. "You know, when I was your age, I auditioned for a program in New York, a conservatory. I didn't tell anyone. I figured if I didn't get in, I could pretend it never happened." I watched her carefully. "I didn't get in," she said flatly. "They said I lacked presence, that I didn't command the room. It stuck with me." I nodded once. "And you never told Mom?" She laughed again. Hollow. "God, no. She would have had a field day. Back then, anything outside of corporate success was just a hobby. Remember when she said my poetry sounded like fortune cookie filler? She told me dance was cute, like baton twirling. We stood in silence. Then she added, "I just didn't think you'd actually go through with it, get this far." There it was, the truth she hadn't meant to say out loud. I stepped back, giving her space. "You broke it on purpose," I said. Her face froze. "You thought if I didn't have the dress, I'd fall apart, that I'd get scared, that I'd turn into you." She opened her mouth, But no words came. I kept my tone even. You think if I shine, it dims you. But it doesn't. It just shows what you gave up. Her shoulders twitched, just slightly. But she said nothing. I walked back inside, the screen door groaning behind me. Velma was still at the table, phone in hand, pretending not to listen. I passed her without a word, went upstairs, and shut the door behind me. The clock read 7:42. Call time was in 2 hours. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their belief. I just needed to finish what I started. The ride to the Performing Arts Center took less than 15 minutes, but I felt every second stretch out like thread pulled too tight. Lorelei drove. We didn't talk much. She glanced at me a few times, but didn't ask questions. That's why I trusted her. She didn't need to hear it to know it had happened. The building came into view, beige stucco, trimmed with brown ironwork, the front steps already buzzing with dancers in warm-up gear and chaperones holding coffee like lifelines. I closed my eyes for a moment as we pulled into the lot. Inside, the air was different. Controlled, purposeful. The scent of hairspray, floor polish, and nerves. A staff member handed us badges at check-in, and Lorelei guided me to the dressing area. I hadn't said a word since we left the house, but when we got to the mirror-lined room, she set down my bag and turned to me. "You sure you're good?" I met her gaze in the reflection. I've been good since the minute she decided to cut it. She nodded once and unzipped the garment bag. I stepped out of my jacket and stood still while she helped me into the midnight blue dress. The fabric settled against me like it had been waiting all its life for this day. "Zip," she said, fingers working carefully. "You made this?" "Every stitch." She let out a low whistle. "If they don't see it, they're blind." The room filled quickly. Dancers warmed up. Music echoed faintly from a nearby practice hall. Some girls laughed too loudly. A few gave me those glances that weren't cruel, just calculating, trying to place me. I didn't bother returning them. The moment the coordinator called our numbers for lineup, the noise dropped. We filed out and stood backstage. I was 12th. My name pinned to my hip. The music from contestant 11 thumped faintly under the floorboards. I flexed my toes inside my shoes and focused on breathing. "Number 12, you're up," someone called. The lights went down. I stepped into the wings, and then onto the stage. The spotlight didn't blind me, it just felt honest, like this was where truth lived. I walked to center stage, not rushed, not theatrical, just full and calm. The piano intro began. My body moved before my thoughts did, years of training pulling me forward. I didn't count beats. I didn't chase choreography. I told a story in motion, and not one person in the audience knew it was about betrayal. I let the pauses linger. I let my breath show. I didn't perform for approval. I embodied what it looked like when a woman has been counted out and comes anyway. At one point, in a still pose between movements, I saw her, back row. Delphine, arms crossed, stone-faced, and beside her, Velma, with her lips slightly parted, holding her purse like it might defend her. I finished the routine in silence. My hand over my heart, head tilted back, eyes open. Applause erupted before the music had even faded. I walked to the edge of the stage and gave a small bow, not for them, but for me, for every hour of training, for every time I sewed in secret, for every piece of myself I'd stitched back together. I exited the stage and met Lorelei backstage. "You leveled the room," she said, her voice low. "I don't know if they're ready for what comes next." We waited in the green room as scores were tallied. Chatter buzzed around me. Compliments, speculation. I sat quietly, sipping water from a paper cup, watching the clock. Then the head judge stepped up to the mic. "Before we announce the top placements," he said, "we want to take a moment to recognize something extraordinary." My stomach twisted, but I stayed still. There was a competitor who not only performed with grace and power, but also designed and constructed her own costume, fully original, from scratch. He paused. Then, contestant number 12, would you mind stepping forward? I stood. My knees didn't shake. I walked to the front of the stage, felt the spotlight again. He leaned toward the mic. This dress, who made it? I didn't hesitate. I did! The room erupted. Applause, louder than before. Some people stood. I saw faces I didn't recognize smiling, clapping, and in the far corner, I saw Delphine. Not smiling, not clapping, frozen. Velma turned toward her. Her hand twitched. Her phone slipped from her grip and hit the floor with a soft thud. And I stood there, not needing their reaction to validate what I already knew. I hadn't just danced, I had declared. The applause was still ringing in my ears as I walked off stage, but I wasn't holding on to it. I'd said what I came to say, through every movement, every breath, every ounce of fabric I'd built myself. Let them keep clapping. I had already stepped beyond the noise. Backstage, Lorelei met me with wide eyes and a proud nod. You nailed it, she whispered, squeezing my arm. But I need to do something now. Trust me. She pulled a small flash drive from her jacket pocket, silver, plain, silent, and turned down the hallway that led toward the judge's lounge. I didn't ask. I already knew. While I waited in the green room, a quiet buzz began to ripple through the corridor. People moved faster. A couple of assistants from the staff passed by, whispering with their heads close. No one said my name, but a few glanced in my direction with curiosity. I stayed seated, legs crossed, hands folded over my knee. Lorelei was gone maybe 15 minutes. When she returned, she didn't say a word, just sat beside me with a soft exhale like she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Down the hall, the judging panel had gathered in a separate room to finalize the scores. One of the organizers stepped out to fetch someone. His eyes found me. Miss Warner, he said gently, would you mind coming with me? I nodded and stood. Lorelei didn't move, but I felt her eyes follow me the whole way. The lounge was colder than the stage had been. It smelled like overbrewed coffee and air freshener trying too hard. A long table stretched down the middle of the room, covered in clipboards, ballots, a half-eaten croissant. Judge Ramirez looked up from a tablet as I entered. He didn't smile. Behind him, the screen on the wall was paused at a still frame that turned my stomach. Delphine's back, facing the camera. My bedroom door slightly ajar behind her. Her hands holding the ivory dress, the one I'd sewn over 7 weeks of exhaustion and hope. Do you recognize this? He asked quietly. I nodded. Your friend brought us the footage, he continued. Security cameras in the hallway outside your room captured her entering late last night. Then we received this. He pressed play. On screen, Delphine moved with eerie calm. She unfolded the dress, laid it across the bed, checked over her shoulder, then reached into her purse and pulled out a pair of scissors. I watched her slice through the fabric like she was trimming paper. One cut across the neckline, another through the lace at the shoulder. She didn't rush. She folded the dress neatly afterward, tucked it back into the garment bag like it had never happened. When the video stopped, I looked down at the floor. Do you want to press charges? Ramirez asked. His tone wasn't forceful, just factual. Before I could answer, the door opened again. Velma. She looked confused at first, as though someone had called her in for the wrong reason. She straightened her blouse, smiled politely at the panel, then turned to me. What's going on? She asked. No one answered her. Judge Ramirez gestured to the screen. You should see this. He played it again. This time I didn't watch the screen. I watched my mother. Her expression shifted almost instantly, from confusion to disbelief to something too cold to name. Her mouth parted. Her hand slowly lifted to cover it. No, she said under her breath. She wouldn't. She wouldn't. But the footage was still rolling. She did, I said. Velma blinked at me, speechless. I didn't shout. I didn't ask her why she was shocked. I didn't need her to speak at all. What I needed had already been said. They offered me the choice again. We can pursue formal consequences. This falls under sabotage of property and competitive misconduct. The school and state board will support your claim. I took a long breath. Then quietly, "Not today." They blinked, surprised. "I didn't come here to ruin her," I said. "I came to prove she couldn't ruin me." Velma was still rooted in place, eyes red and full of something she'd never shown me before. Helplessness. "I need some air," I added. I walked past them, out the door, down the hall, and into the sunlight. Outside, the courtyard was quiet. A few contestants sat under trees with sandwiches or phones, lost in their own victories or failures. I sat on a bench near the far edge and tilted my face toward the sky. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of trying to be understood. I just felt done. Not defeated, not numb, just done needing anyone to give me permission to feel proud of myself. And that, in itself, was a kind of peace I hadn't known I was allowed to want. The buzz started as a low murmur, someone saying my name, another whisper about that video. I didn't move at first. I stayed seated at the edge of the courtyard, soaking in those final minutes of peace before everything else shifted. The air had changed. Not the temperature, but the feel of it, like the truth was already working its way through the walls. A voice crackled from the loudspeakers inside the building, calm, official, just loud enough to carry through the halls and out to where I sat. For the integrity of competition and transparency with all participants, it began, we will now display footage related to a misconduct investigation. This will be broadcast throughout the main lobby and common areas. I stood slowly. When I stepped back into the building, people had already gathered. Some stood frozen mid-step. Others had their phones out, filming the screen. I didn't need to ask what they were seeing. The video played in silence, no music, no commentary. Just the image of Delphine in my room, her face half in shadow, her hands opening my garment bag, her posture calm, efficient. The scissors gleamed for a moment before she brought them down across the neckline of the dress. There was an audible gasp. Someone near me whispered, "Oh my God, that's her sister." I kept walking, past the stairs, past the whispers. I didn't flinch. My heels clicked softly on the tile as I made my way to the center of the crowd. Velma stood near the refreshments table, one hand clamped over her mouth, the other clinging to her purse strap. Her eyes stayed locked on the screen, even as people turned toward her. She looked like someone watching a slow car crash, unable to move, unable to look away. The video ended. No one clapped, no one spoke. Just that heavy, breathless pause where shame lives. And then Delphine emerged. She came around the corner from the east corridor, clearly unaware of what had just happened. But the moment she stepped into the lobby and saw the way everyone had pivoted toward her, saw the paused screen still frozen on her holding the scissors, her face dropped. "Wait, what is this?" she said, blinking fast. No one answered. She took a step forward, then two. Her arms were stiff at her sides, her mouth parted like she wanted to explain but didn't know how. Velma turned toward her daughter. "Delphine," she started, but stopped herself. Delphine's eyes scanned the room and finally landed on me. "Why would you show that?" she asked, her voice sharp, unsteady. You could have just come to me. We could have talked." I said nothing. "You made me look like a monster," she said louder now. "This isn't how families handle things." Lorelei stepped beside me and whispered, "She still thinks you did this to her." Delphine's face went pale when another voice broke through the crowd. "Is it true?" Harlan. He stood near the front entrance, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. His tone was even, but low enough that silence fell around him instantly. She turned toward him like someone reaching for a lifeline. "Baby, come on, you know me. You know I'd never. I knew who you pretended to be, he said, stepping closer. But this was intentional. You planned to humiliate your own sister, on her biggest day. Delphine opened her mouth, closed it. She took a step toward him, but he raised a hand. I'm done defending you, he said. She stopped moving. You always said people didn't give you enough credit, he continued. Maybe they gave you too much. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. The sound of the glass doors swinging shut echoed louder than the video had. Delphine didn't follow. She stood there, the crowd parting just enough to leave her alone at the center. Her dress was still perfect, her makeup untouched. But nothing about her looked composed anymore. Her voice, her posture, her presence, all of it unraveled in the quiet. Velma didn't go to her, and I certainly didn't. Someone behind me murmured, "How do you even recover from something like that?" I didn't answer. I just let their question hang in the air. Instead, I turned toward the stage doors, where one of the coordinators had reappeared, headset on, scanning the crowd. "Nariah Warner," she called. "Top honors. Please report to the stage." I didn't walk toward Delphine. I walked forward, toward the light, where my name finally belonged. The stage lights dimmed as I stepped down the side ramp, escorted by a soft-spoken volunteer with a clipboard and a kind smile. She congratulated me, quietly, before vanishing into the backstage swirl of tech crew and clipboards and whispered calls. I walked alone through the hallway, still half-lit by afternoon sun through the skylights above. I could hear the auditorium's applause fading behind me, muffled but real. This wasn't about clapping anymore. Someone tried to stop me outside the green room, asked for a photo, a quick interview. I shook my head gently. "Maybe later," I said. "Not now." I kept walking until the hallway turned left and opened into the back corridor of the venue, near the emergency exit that led out to a small stone terrace. I needed air. Not fresh exactly, just unfiltered. The gold in the sky had begun to deepen, brushing everything in amber and hush. I leaned against the railing and closed my eyes for a second, not out of exhaustion, but to let the quiet stretch. No talking, no questions. Just me, the fading day, and the sound of my own breathing. My fingers drifted toward my waist, where the inside lining of the dress brushed against my ribs. I reached under gently and touched the soft patch I'd sewn into the inside months ago. It wasn't large, just enough for 2 stitched words from the letter Dad had left me before he passed. "Shine quietly." I used to think strength had to announce itself. Now I knew better. I didn't cry, didn't even blink hard. I just stood still and let the fabric ground me, the way only something made with full intention can. Voices echoed down the hallway behind me. Not angry, just active. People re-entering the building, families calling out to one another, plans being made for dinner. And then I heard my name again, but softer this time. I turned slightly to see Delphine standing 10 feet away, just inside the corridor, one hand on the frame of the open door. She didn't speak, just looked at me, eyes red-rimmed, expression unreadable. We stared at each other for maybe 4-5 seconds. Her posture was stiff. Her lips parted like she might say something. An apology, a justification, anything. But I didn't wait. I turned back toward the railing. My message had already been delivered. Not in words, but in action. I had no interest in dragging her through the shame she'd already created for herself. That wasn't the lesson. It never was. She didn't follow, and I didn't look back. When I re-entered the building, most of the crowd had dispersed. A few dancers were still hugging family. Some parents took photos of their kids holding plaques. The tension in the air had thinned, like a thunderstorm that had passed without leaving rain. Velma stood near the lobby exit, phone in hand, staring down at her screen like she was willing it to offer some script for what to say next. I walked right past her, but she reached out, just a small movement, fingertips brushing the sleeve of my dress. "Nariah," she said. Not sharp, not forceful, just my name. I stopped but didn't face her. "I'm proud of you," she added. soft, almost uncertain, like she hadn't decided what the sentence meant yet. I didn't speak, just gave a small nod, barely visible, and kept walking. Out the glass doors, down the steps, into the kind of evening that feels like release. I didn't think about what Velma meant, or whether she regretted anything, or if she finally believed me. That wasn't mine to solve. And Delphine? I wasn't waiting for her to explain herself. There are moments in life when closure doesn't need conversation. Sometimes the most complete ending is silence, the kind that comes after you've finally stopped fighting for someone else's understanding. I walked to the parking lot. The car was warm from the afternoon sun, and when I slid into the driver's seat, I let out a slow breath that didn't feel stuck anymore. The plaque lay in the back seat. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I pulled off my shoes, tucked them beneath the passenger side, and rested both hands on the steering wheel. Not because I needed to drive away fast, but because I could. The sun dipped lower, stretching shadows across the lot. And I drove. Not away from anything, but toward everything that waited for me beyond this place. The road back toward town felt longer than usual, though it was probably just the quiet. No music, no phone calls, no one asking where I was or when I'd be home. I let the hum of the engine settle beneath my ribs while the last of the sun dipped behind the low hills of Santa Fe. I didn't go straight back to my apartment. Instead, I pulled into the overlook behind the venue, a small stone bench, a low wall, and a view that stretched all the way to the distant orange haze where the desert met the horizon. I parked, took the plaque from the back seat, and walked to the edge. I sat down. There were still smudges of setting sunlight along the skyline. Warm, muted, forgiving. The kind of light that doesn't ask anything of you. I let the award rest across my lap, not out of pride, but as something to hold. Something real. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still. And that was new. A breeze moved over my shoulder, bringing the scent of mesquite and dry earth. Behind me, traffic buzzed faintly along the outer road, a reminder that the world continued turning, completely indifferent to what had happened today. That, too, felt like relief. People had started whispering about Delphine as soon as the lobby cleared. I didn't need to see the post to know what they said. Screenshots from the security video had already begun circulating. Some anonymous Twitter account had uploaded the footage, captioned with something brutal, like "This is what jealousy looks like." Delphine's name was trending in the wrong places. I knew because Lorelei texted me a screenshot with a single line. "You didn't have to say a word." I hadn't, and I wouldn't. Her fall didn't come from me. It came from her own hands. Hands that couldn't stop cutting, even when there was nothing left to take. She'd called Harlan 7 times. I knew because I saw her pacing the parking lot after he walked away. He didn't answer once. She stood by her car, phone pressed to her ear, then stared at it like it had betrayed her. But it hadn't. It had simply mirrored back what she gave. Velma, for her part, had gone quiet. Not the kind of silence that waits to speak, but the kind that realizes too late how much had been ignored. She stood a few feet away from Delphine near the end of the event, just standing, not hugging, not explaining. I caught her eyes once as I exited. She didn't follow. I didn't wait. Later, someone told me Delphine's employer had contacted her. HR wanted to review conduct standards. No one had fired her, not yet. But the calls had stopped. The brunches, the polite nods, the fragile little world she'd curated around titles and appearances. Gone, or cracking fast. None of that felt good to me. None of it hurt either. It just was. I sat a little longer on the bench, brushing my thumb over the engraved plaque in my lap. The words meant something, but they weren't why I came. They weren't why I stayed. What no one knew, what the headlines wouldn't capture, was that I almost didn't compete at all. That the night I finished the second dress, I cried over the hem. Not because of the sabotage I expected, but because of the part of me that still, even then, wanted someone to say, "You matter." I'd sewn the patch inside, not just as a tribute to my father, but as a reminder to myself. If no one else believes, I still can. The hardest part hadn't been forgiving Delphine. It was choosing not to need her forgiveness. That was the real release. By the time the sky had turned completely dark, only a few cars remained in the lot. Some staff, a few late guests. I gathered myself, stood slowly, and walked back toward my car. As I opened the door, I caught a glimpse of Velma standing near the building's glass entrance. She wasn't moving, just watching. She raised a hand halfway, as if to wave or to ask me to wait, but stopped herself. I didn't break stride. Some goodbyes don't come with words. I placed the award in the passenger seat and took one last look at the lights across the city below. Then I whispered, "Just for me." I don't need them to clap. I just needed to know I could still stand. I closed the door, turned the key, and backed out slow. The wheels hummed over the gravel, steady and sure. No revenge, no wreckage. Just the sound of leaving, and the kind of peace that makes no noise at all.